Hello, I'm Dr. Tiffany Tyler Garner, and I have the privilege of serving as the Children Advocacy Alliance's Executive Director. Our mission is to bring our time, talent, and resources to improving conditions for Nevada's children in the areas of education, safety, economic well-being, and health. We are committed to being the independent voice for Nevada's children and families. With each podcast, we will look at ways our community can work together to answer a critical call to action to provide our children with all the resources they need to make a strong start in life. Today, we'll be exploring child safety and other issues with Representative Stephen Horsford and Assemblywoman Shondra Summers-Armstrong.
Hi, I'm Chip Carter with Children's Advocacy Alliance, and welcome to our podcast. Today we have some great guests. We have Congressman Stephen Horsford. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chip.
And we have Assemblywoman Shondra Summers-Armstrong. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chip.
So I want to just jump right in, and if you can tell us a little bit about your background through the lens of how your professional and personal journey has led you to be an advocate for children and families in Nevada.
Well, first, let me commend the Children's Advocacy Alliance for all the tremendous work led by Dr. Tiffany Tyler Gardner, and it's great to be on with Assemblywoman Summers-Armstrong. And, you know, this is the community I grew up in. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, raised by a single mother. I'm the oldest of four, and so I saw my mom struggle as she raised me during a difficult period in her life, and also at a different time in our community where there was not the same support or infrastructure for children, for families, for single moms in particular. And so my whole passion has been around how I could give back to the community that helped support me when I needed them the most. As a teenager growing up here, trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, I knew I wanted to make a change, but I didn't always know what form that would come into. So I never planned to be a congressman.
I was just going to ask, I was like, so when did that kind of solidify for you?
Yeah, we're jumping over like 20 years of timeline, but you know, I started in college serving as a Nevada intern at the Nevada legislature. And that is honestly how I found out that you could make change through public policy, and to do it in multiple ways, as an elected official, as professional staff, working with the elected official, as advocates, trying to effectuate change within policy, or as volunteers, as constituents. I represent one of the most diverse districts. It's a very hard-working district. It covers 52,000 square miles throughout the state of Nevada. So it's both rural and urban. And one of the unique through points is that we have a lot of underserved communities. And so whether that's in the areas of healthcare, education, job and workforce development training.
Housing, for sure.
One of my biggest issues that I'm working on now, or the issues of trying to make our communities safer, which is, again, another passion of mine based on, you know, my own experience. I lost my father to gun violence when I was a freshman in college. Wow. And so, you know, again, that impacted my trajectory. Fortunately, I chose to go in the direction of giving back rather than the cycle of violence. And so I just recently introduced and helped pass the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which includes my bill, the Breaking the Cycle of Violence provisions, which is $250 million of investment into community-based organizations that are working to reduce crime, save lives, and break the cycle of violence.
Awesome. That's great. And how about you, Assemblywoman? Can you tell me a little bit about how you got to this point and what led you into service?
Well, thank you for having me. And my story is not unique at all. I started my life, a daughter of ministers, family of people who served in church ministry. And so I looked at service from that perspective. I did get a wild hair when I was in the 6th grade, and I said to a history teacher that I want to be president. Now, I had no idea what it meant to do all that, but I can remember that teacher telling me that I could not be president because I was a girl and that I was religious, and that just didn't make for a good leader of the nation.
Wow. Now I'm sorry, the female thing, we've seen that struggle for sure, but the religious thing, I've not really heard that as an objection to being in office, especially president.
Well, I had no idea what he meant as a kid. He went on to say some things about having to understand that when you lead in service, that you have to do a lot of different things, and then negotiations and all this stuff. So I have no idea where this gentleman was coming from, but the sad part is that he was a teacher in a public school, and that was his perception of me and my upbringing. So, you fast forward many decades, and in 1990, I moved to Nevada and got the opportunity to work in 1993 for Judge Adelia D. Guy III. That was my very first experience working with anyone who was an elected official, and to watch the work that he did in the community, to hear the conversations, to sort of just get a foothold into what service from the perspective of an elected official meant, the impact that he had in the community, the work that he did to bring programs to help youth get off the path of violence, the work camps and family court. It was really interesting, and he just gave me this spark that you don't just get to go to work and enjoy the benefit of your experience and your luck, but that there are things that you can do in the community to help. So I just started to do some advocating in the community and worked on some community projects like we did the Stop the F Street closure, which was a huge thing back in 2008, 2009. Worked with the Congressman on setting up a community, having a place on the Southern Nevada Economic Community Council that allowed us to have a voice. And it just kind of blossomed from there. I was, freshman class president in high school, and always been kind of bossy and active and an advocate for the little guy. And the door just opened, and I walked through.
All right, awesome. Well, since you're both here, solve the housing problem. Just go ahead right now. So seriously, we see it everywhere, but I think in Nevada, and I'm glad you brought up about rural as well too, because I think CA is obviously statewide. We really try to address the issues for children and families statewide. And I've been here 11 years and I've never quite seen a divide. And I'm from the South. So I understand the divide between urban and rural, but out here, it's stark. So I'd love to talk about housing in general, specifically the housing legislation you just had sponsored. But also, I'd love to touch on some of the rural stuff if you can as well, and then also bring that home to Nevada and your district and sort of how the housing stuff is working there. So if you can tell us a little bit about your legislation, that'd be great.
Well, first, the problem is, Vegas in particular and most parts of Nevada have been known as a place where you can still pursue and obtain the American dream. At least it was until the last few years, particularly after the housing crisis in 2008. What we started to hear really directly from constituents, and the Assemblywoman and I have jurisdiction over a lot of the same neighborhoods, is number one, their rents were escalating upwards of 30% in just the last year, 18 months. 30%. So that we're talking about for a senior on fixed income, a family who may have two income earners or one, You're talking about veterans. You're talking about every single one in our community, including working families. Like, this is not only affecting low-income individuals, seeing their rents increasing 30%. So for some people, that's $50 a month. For others, that's a couple hundred a month. Whatever it is, it's too much. So then we started to dig into why is this happening. And what we found is 17% of the homes in Southern Nevada are now owned by these non-owner investors. So
That's a high percentage.
and it gets worse. In some parts of our community, there are census areas or zip codes where up to 30% of the homes, 1 in 3, are owned by these out-of-state corporate speculators, companies that pay cash to buy these properties. That prices out individuals who are local, first-time home buyers, veterans who are trying to use a VA, families who are trying to, start their first home or grow into a bigger home.
So let me just stop you. So that is, you're also saying it's, what do they call it? Single family homes, not just apartments. We're not just talking about apartment rent.
No.
We're talking about houses all over the
across,
valley
right.
that are, so sorry, but I just wanted to clarify, this is not just people in apartments are getting their rents jacked up. It's also people in homes in your neighborhood.
So if I can just interject, during the 2021 session, there was the average cost of a single family home in Nevada was around $350,000 for a previously owned home.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward now, a couple months ago, we were upwards of $480-something thousand. That prices out your government workers that are entry level and mid range. That prices out your folks who, like me, was at the time in 1990 when I came here, we bought our first home in 1991. I was a legal secretary at a small private law firm. My ex-husband was a veteran. We used the VA to buy our very first house. We had to scrape up. Mind you, we're making less than $30,000 or $40,000 together. We had to scrape $1,500 together to take advantage of the VA. When you put regular people, when you price them out, these are the folks that are not having an opportunity to take advantage of the American dream. And that makes our community not as attractive for people to stay here. If people, regular folks, don't stay and they don't participate, then where does our community go? Yeah, how do we grow? How do we dig in roots? How do we have generations of people who live here and love this community and make it solid? So that's what we're really up against.
And to build on that, a home is also where you create memories. It's a place where you do establish those roots, and it's where you also create wealth, particularly for Black and Latino families. It's the biggest purchase we'll make. It's also the biggest opportunity to create wealth for our families and to pass that down. So I am on the Ways and Means Committee. I am one of 3 members on what's called a Racial Equity Initiative. We've been studying federal law and provisions that we could address the inequities in federal policies, particularly from a racial equity lens. And what we found is, for a long time, people of color could not accumulate wealth because we didn't have home ownership at the same levels. When we did, our homes were appraised at and valued at lesser than other communities. We've had predatory lending where even when we own it, we really don't. And when it's time to pass that down, there's not the same equity that we can give our children. And so what's the solution? I introduced, it's one of many efforts, the HOME Act, which is the Housing Oversight and Mitigating Exploitation Act. It does a couple of things. First, we are still in a pandemic, an emergency health crisis, which again, affects everybody, but disproportionately affects certain communities. And my legislation would ensure that the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the president can declare under a national health emergency that homeowners and renters aren't exploited. Just like we shouldn't be exploited at the gas station or in the grocery store. We should not be exploited in the housing market. This is about putting people over politics and meeting the needs. It also gives the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Marcia Fudge, the ability to go in and monitor by zip code the percentage of homes that are purchased by these corporate speculators. They manipulate the market by buying up whole blocks of neighborhoods in cash. Sometimes they do it in a way that devalues the market. So now I own a home next to that, my home value goes down. Other ways, they rent these properties out. They have higher rates of eviction, lower rates of maintaining the property, which also creates neighborhood instability. And how does this affect children? You know, the Children's Advocacy Alliance. When the family is struggling economically or displaced because of rising rent or not the ability to set those roots, they have to move. They have to uproot. They move schools. I can't tell you the number of elementary schools that I attended in Clark County growing up as a kid, because we had to move to wherever we could find the most affordable place to rent. That's the case for a lot of my constituents. So it's unacceptable. We're working on a number of issues, but this is something that I'm very passionate about because I've seen how this has really affected our community's ability to keep, we call it the Vegas dream, which is the American dream, which is where whether you're a nurse, a guest room attendant, a teacher, a hardworking Nevadan who cares for their family, they should be able to have a safe, secure, affordable place to live for themselves and their family, their children, and for that to not be out of reach.
And I think you bring up that point that, well, both of you actually, we hear over and over again, it takes a village to raise a kid. And we know there's truth to that. And the housing stuff that you're talking about destabilizes that in very real ways, just like what you're saying. But are there some other unique Vegas factors that you see that also destabilize children and families through the housing problems that we're seeing? Are there challenges that may be a little bit more unique to our area than other parts of the country or other parts of the state?
Well, I think that we all know that we have an issue in Las Vegas in particular with people coming in and out. And I think a lot of that has to do with people coming here looking for the American dream. And it's organizations like Children's Advocacy and others that have brought sort of a settling because you all are working with other organizations to bring services and have them more accessible to our community so that when families are coming here and maybe they're slightly unstable and they're trying to find assistance, our local organizations are doing a phenomenal job reaching out to try and help be glue for families. But at the end of the day, we also have to recognize that what the Congressman is talking about does not help. If we have organizations that are just, for whatever reason, raising rents, buying up, taking away the opportunity for people to live comfortably, but with stability, we have to recognize that rising rents, that is a real deal. When folks are making a decision whether or not they're going to pay their rent or they're going to buy groceries, we have a problem, or seek medical treatment. I've visited a couple of places that do feeding. They have the food. One of the churches in North Las Vegas that I went and visited with the pastor there, Pastor Brown, Bobby Brown, I think his name is, said to me that the numbers of cars that come through their line for free food has not gone down, right? And we're seeing the same thing at other places, at 3 Square and other places that are providing food in the community. I don't have, quantifiable data. I'll lead with that, but I can tell you that if we look at it, I believe we're seeing that families are paying their rent no matter how they can do it, but they're going to these places to get food because now the rent money, the food money is now being used for rent. And we have to admit that this is going on. We have to be honest about it. And we have to also recognize what it's doing to our families and our children. We know that kids cannot learn well in school if they are hungry. I can remember listening years ago to an interview on our local NPR station, and it was talking about Three Square and how they were providing lunch bags on the weekend for kids to take food home. And one of the things that was said during that interview was that they would see children on Monday mornings coming in lethargic, headaches, didn't want to be in class. And when the nurses, thank God for the school nurses and counselors, would ask them, hey, what's going on? The children would say, well, I didn't get to eat very much this weekend. And this is where Three Squared came in with this solution. But the reality is, why is that a solution? And is it really, right? What is going on in our community?
Solution or Band-Aid?
A solution or a Band-Aid. And I think that we have to just, we often, and we have no choice often, I know you don't, as a leader, Congressman, you have to look at the end result, right? And you're trying to fix it. But maybe if we back up 5, 10, 15 steps and look at the cause, we need to take time to do that. Why is that? Why? Because we have wages that are not keeping up with rent costs. We have jobs that are not providing health care. And we are seeing folks that are in emergency rooms dealing with issues. I just toured Sunrise Hospital this week or last week, where I was talking to the CEO there and talking about people coming in for help for things that would just be primary care, right? So we see a culmination of things that are getting us to this crisis, and we have to find ways to deal with it.
I just wanted to add up from a rural perspective. So I was just in Caliente in Lincoln County, and also this is true in Pahrump and Tonopah and other parts of my district. So they have a problem recruiting and retaining healthcare professionals. They have a great program with the University of Nevada Medical School where they bring in residencies or people who are getting credits or loan forgiveness to work in rural communities. They don't have a place for them to live. So even though we have these programs and these opportunities, there's literally no housing that's open and available to them for that doctor, or if they have a spouse or children. And so specifically in rural communities, it's about how we customize some unique solution, because the solution that we need in Southern Nevada is not the same as Lincoln County, is not the same as Tonopah, Nye County, or Pahrump. Every particularly rural community has some very unique needs. I could not get the VA. We opened a new VA outreach clinic in Pahrump. We couldn't get a dedicated doctor there for more than a year it took us. And housing was one of the impediments. So this is not only an issue, again, that affects lower income individuals, as important as it is for us to have services, utility assistance, housing assistance, eviction mitigation programs to keep people in their homes. We have a lot of middle income families that are struggling, and many of them sometimes don't qualify, right, for the assistance, but they still need policies that work for them. And that is something that I think both the Assemblywoman and I and others understand. The last thing I'll say is, we have a lot of land here, and we do use our public lands as a resource. And the goal should always be to make sure whatever new land that comes available through the BLM process, Bureau of Land Management process, that a portion of it is dedicated for affordable housing. And by affordable housing, I mean all forms of affordable housing, from workforce housing for teachers and nurses and public first responders to housing for seniors. We have an increasing aging population, and we've done a lot in that area. The governor just dedicated $500 million from the American Rescue Plan for the Home Means Nevada initiative that the legislature through the IFC approved. But we also have to fund homeless And homelessness is not the same either, because now we have more and more homeless teens. We have an increased number of families with children who, again, because of the increasing cost of rent, if they can't afford the rent, they get evicted.
And then where do they go? Yeah.
They're living in their cars.
Right.
They're homeless, living in their cars. Number of our elementary schools, and I know that the Children's Youth Alliance works on this with the schools and the wraparound services, but we have a number of elementary schools in particular with a high percentage of homeless youth, kids who come to school and leave and aren't going to a home.